Well, hi folks, and welcome to episode 178 of Retro Power Uncut. And here we are in the fabrication shop, and we'll start with Audi Quattro. Heaped around Jamie on the floor here are various sort of fairly chunky bits of steel that we've just received from our steel suppliers this morning, Tamworth Steel. Neil at Tamworth Steel, always been very helpful and very prompt service. And down against the wall over there is a rather heavy section, 150 parallel flange channel, which by magic, Jamie will now show on the screen, the main progress on the Audi this week has been getting our ducks in a row with regard to the jig fixtures for this car, because I'm making the fixtures for it, which we'd be doing anyway. I talked about last week why we aren't hiring some to use as a basis to make our fixtures, and to that end I'm drawing up the fixtures in CAD prior to us making them, just so I've got part drawings, I can do some fabrication drawings for all the parts. It's just a bit easier when you're fabricating a whole pile of bits like that. It's just easier to work to drawings rather than just sort of from your head. And then that lump of channel will become relevant if you look at the CAD, because that's what we'll be making the tower sections. I've usually done them in box section and tube. I've decided to do them in channel this time. It just makes the tops easier in that you can get at a bolt in the top of the tower from inside the channel section, and it's still very sturdy, and you've still got two faces to square off in terms of datuming the channel section onto the base plates when we're laying them out on the fabrication table. Obviously you need references from edges. It's easy to get references to the edges. It's got nice square edges, easy to refer to the edges, but it still means we've got access out of the top to get a bolt up straight through a plate welded to the top of that. And I've also been careful to put quite tall, they're various heights for various reasons, but quite tall bosses, which are drilled solid 40mm mild steel bar. Those bosses on top of the towers are drilled so that a bolt can go all the way through them and screw into the subframe mountings on the car, or screw into the jig locations on the car. But it gives us enough of a spacing that we can then make a shorter boss and actually fit the subframes so that we can have the engine in on the jig. Because one of the problems is if you jig up the subframe mounting points, obviously you then can't fit the subframe. So tried to allow for that this time. Obviously a lot of jig fixtures do make allowances for that. Often when I've made bolt-in fixtures, I just make them to bolt on directly so we can do structural work. With these, they can be dual purpose. With the spacer bolted in there, as per the drawing, as per the CAD that you can see, a bolt can go all the way through and fix the car down. But then if we need to fit the running gear, we can take that out, fit a shorter boss, and then a bolt can go through and clamp up the shorter boss and the jig fixture and the subframe into the body shell, so we can then have the running gear in the car as well while it's still on the fixtures. So that's the situation with that. So hopefully we should be able to get into the fabrication on that next week, all being well. There's a lot of other things going on, so it's sort of splitting the tasks down however they come about, but hopefully into fabrication next week on fixtures for this. There's a lot of other heavy fabrication coming up because of the state we're at with the Jensen. As you can see, this is looking rather good now. Matt has done a beautiful job. We've obviously covered a lot of that in previous weeks, and he's on the very tail end of that work now. He has just noticed a slight glitch in the line down the side of the body here. I think Cal may have spotted it as well earlier. There was a slight unevenness to the flow of the panel here. There's a slight high spot in the wing here. So he's just getting that high spot taken down a little bit and just revising, just re-looking at that little area there. But other than that, pretty good. I don't know if he's just comparing one side to the other, but there's just a bit of a look at the back edge of the wings. Just very, very slight unevenness there. Other than that, pretty much completely there in terms of the panel prep, and that's really nice timing, because we needed to do, I mentioned this before, but we needed to do a trial sit in this car. We need to get the owner to have a sit in, and the owner's visiting on Saturday to do just that and have a look at the progress and see where we're at with the car, and that's really nice. It's really good to get customers, owners into the workshop and see progress and see where they're at with the car. And we need to do that trial sit because we've got some concerns. The customer's quite keen to keep the Interceptor seats, which is fine. we have two concerns there. One, they've been retrimmed, and the retrim has involved stiffening up the bases of those seats and also refoaming them, which has raised the seating position, and we think it's possibly raised the seating position too far. And secondly, they don't really have a lot of side support, those seats, and this car is going to be able to generate, despite it's not a sports car, but it is going to be able to generate a reasonable cornering load, and I think physically staying in the seat is going to be quite difficult. So that's an area we need to address. So with the customer here, it'll be a lot easier to discuss. He can sit in the seat, check the seating position, see how he fits in the car. He's driven the car in the past, so quite a lot. So he'll be familiar with what his seating position was, and that maybe he liked or disliked it. I think he did like the previous seating position, so it's just checking that this is still faithful to that. So I'm not completely sure it will be. So we may need to do some revisions on the seats, but that's one of the main reasons for his visit on Saturday. And secondly, it's just to verify that what we're doing on with the positioning of controls is all good, and generally have a good look over the car. There are a couple of other areas we've got to discuss, but yeah, it's all coming together really quite well now. We're getting to the latter stages of the body metal work. I think Matt, had you been trying some of the window trims in as well? Do I recall? I'd seen Jarkle mention something about that. The quarter windows. Yes. I think Matt's been sorting out the fit of the rear quarter window. They're actually, I think they're stainless, although we're calling them chrome. Certainly the one I'm looking at now is stainless. I can't remember whether one side's chrome or one side's stainless on this car. This is certainly stainless. But sorting these, the fit of these trims out, because the body line just below the gutter, for the first few inches below the gutter line, wasn't quite right. So Matt's done some more lead work here just to get this line right, and also get these trims to fit a bit better there, because the fit wasn't perfect. But we've been looking at pictures of Jensen's wherever we can, of interceptors online, trying to establish what typical panel gaps were, and we've established that the panel gaps were all over the place, and that they vary from reasonable to terrible, and that we're pretty satisfied with where we're at on this car. These, I would say, are definitely greater than the reasonable end of those, so we're pretty pleased overall. So yeah, I think that's pretty much where we're at in terms of the body work on the Jensen. And then Stu has also been working on this in a couple of areas, both under bonnet. The bonnet's down, I'll leave that down because Jamie will have some footage of that anyway, but Stu's principal areas have been working on the screen wash tank, getting that mounted. We've got a 3D printed one. Just so that it's a mock-up in the engine bay. So Stu's been making the bracketry for that to get that fitted in the engine bay, and then moved on to a slightly more complicated area, which is mounting the engine ECU, which is being mounted in the engine bay. The loom, we don't really want to remake the engine loom. The customer's already bought the engine loom. It already exists, and the justification for remaking it is pretty limited when the engine ECU is designed to live in an engine bay that comes with these. Normally we put it inside the car, but it is a weatherproof unit, so we're going to be mounting it in the engine bay. It will be shielded. The water won't be able to get to it, so we're quite happy to do that, and it's got quite a nice little home in this corner of the engine bay. So Stu's done a mock-up bracket to check the fit above the brake servo, mounting off the bulkhead so that the ECU sits above the brake servo. He's made a mock-up bracket. That's all gone really well. So he's now making the final bracket in aluminium, in 2mm thick aluminium, which I've just noticed him. He's just spot welded that aluminium bracket together and got all that nice. And that's going to that'll mount the ECU in there. Then he's going to make a cover, an aluminium cover that will go over the ECU, just in case any rainwater does get dropped on it. It'll come out. It won't sit on top. The water won't get directly onto it. But also it will just cover it in and make it look neat. Make the bulkhead will then look reasonably balanced, because we've got the HVAC unit sat that side in its little box, and then this side we'll have the box covering the ECU. It'll look reasonably neat, reasonably tidy on the bulkhead. We're quite pleased with the layout there, so that's looking pretty good. Then after that, the next, obviously tied into that, Stu's also been working out the wiring routing and putting provisioning into the bulkhead to enable the wiring to be grommeted through the bulkhead, which has been a reasonably involved process, because the obvious points to put that wiring through the bulkhead were on the top. And I don't really like putting wiring through the top of a bulkhead unless a lot of care is taken to the way that wiring goes through, because it's just asking for water leaks. It's asking for rainwater that somehow gets onto the top of that bulkhead, which it will, to then find its way down the wiring. It's very hard to grommet things through. You can put bulkhead connectors in, but we haven't got the luxury of bulkhead connectors on the wiring loom that's got to go through on this. So Stu, we talked about making a raised section in the top of the bulkhead, a little pressed section that just stepped that up. But then actually, having looked at the problem in a bit more depth, Stu's worked out that he could actually get the wiring through the sides of the through in the sides of the sort of top of the transmission tunnel section of the bulkhead. There was actually plenty of room there in the end. So he's going through there where there won't be any water ingress problems, and we don't have any issues with water pooling directly where a wiring grommet is. So that was a pleasing result, and I know he's made a nice little recess section for the wiring grommet to go into, so it looks super neat on the bulkhead. So yeah, getting the wiring provisioning in the main battery cable live feed provision in, and yeah, that's all coming together really quite well now. So yeah, we're getting through. We're knocking off the dry build stages on this. There's still quite a bit more to go. We've still got to carry on with the air filter unit. We need to do some revisions on the radiator, really. I mean, the radiator fits the car, has been made to fit the car, but it wasn't made for this car. It's had some strange modifications to it. I think we're going to cut some of those off and make them look a bit tidier and sort those out, do some revisions there. Stu's going to get on to doing a bit of work around the dash, getting the fiberglass dash that came with the vehicle to us, getting that mounted into the car so that on Saturday, when a customer visits, we have the sort of mock-up dash, an empty, loose sort of shell of a dash in place, just to get the feel for the interior, and just to sort of so we can discuss a few of the finer points on the interior in a bit more detail. But then once that's done, I think the next stage is onto the heavy metal part, which I mentioned earlier, which is that we need to make a rotisserie or means of rotating. I'm keeping an open mind on this because we're wondering about a couple of other ways of doing it at the moment, because it is an incredibly heavy body chassis. These are a semi-monocoque design, if you like. They have a full tubular backbone chassis, so almost a ladder frame chassis, but then they also have a metal body tub on top of that. In the case of the Jensen CV8, this car, the Interceptor's predecessor, the bulk of the upper body was fiberglass. It had metal body, had steel apertures, but fiberglass body. Whereas on these, they changed, that's all steel, and it was very heavy to start with. And then in the case of this car, the re-engineering that's occurred at the rear end, prior to the vehicle being here, has been done in extremely thick sections, so that the car is very heavy. And I'm a little bit concerned about our normal means of mounting it to a rotisserie, whether they will be robust enough. So I'm just pondering other solutions to that problem, sort of just working through that in my head at the moment. But regardless of the solution, it's going to involve some of that heavy box section that's on the floor being used to make a structure for that purpose, regardless of how it's done. So we've got to do that, and we also need to make a trolley for this car, because as you'll have noticed, all of the cars that get through to the body shop will be nestling on trolleys that are made for that job, because that car will spend a number of weeks, quite a number of weeks, possibly a number of months at that stage, and we don't want to damage any of the undercoating at the point once that undercoating has been applied. So we like to be able to have the car sat safely on a trolley. Pardon me. I'm going to do a sneeze. We like to be able to have the car sat safely on the trolley. There's no way it can come off. It's easy to wheel around the unit. For the few hours it takes to make the trolley, pardon me. Oh dear. Oh dear. For the few hours it takes to make the trolley, it's well worth making the trolley, so the car's safe, we can handle it easily, no harm can come to it. So that's one of the other stages for next week, is getting this car up into the air so we can work out the pickup points for the trolley, and then Matt will get on and do some fabrication work, going sort of the opposite extreme of the job really, from fine application of lead to MIG welding 75 to 50 box section. It's the opposite extreme of the job really, but yeah, making the trolley up for this. one of the primary jobs next week, and then continuing with dry build operations. So we're gradually ticking off the list, but still a few more to go. I think at that point, given that I just mentioned trolleys and bodywork and things like that, we'll probably go on to the body shop. First thing I want to say is we touched on last week about the bit of a booth refurb, not really a refurb, but just a periodic cleaning that we do. We probably end up doing that. Given that we don't paint that many cars, remember, we probably do that 3 or 4 times a year, probably. But I'll hand over to Mark to just finish off talking about the booth clean-up that was started the previous week.
All right, so spray booth's now refurbed. Gone for the plastic sheeting, so Gaz can spray away now all he wants, and we can just take this off and quickly just put that back on. Makes it a lot easier and efficient. Yeah, so this is all spick and span now. I've got some direct to do now, which is 2K spray on just black, matte or gloss. I think these are all going gloss. So this is Project One's prop shaft, all prepped ready. They come with a coating on, but then they just rust so easy. So we put the direct polyurethane on it, just makes it more durable and better. I think this is Project One, the mount for the prop. This is for the Bluey type. Churchill's, that's for Churchill, yeah, servo. These are for maybe Camaro. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Ant's made these for the Camaro interior. Is that for the window, is it? And yeah, the steering rack for Churchill. Like I say, we just want to get a nice coating on this bare metal bit, what comes just bare. It just rusts up straight away, so we get a nice coating on it. And yeah, then a few little bits to do, and then hopefully I'm back on Churchill again. But we'll talk about that later.
So thank you, Mark, for that. And then the next phase on from that really is the actual body shop progress, where again, I'm probably just going to hand over to Mark because the progress has been on the Churchill Jag and the Redux BMW. But again, Mark's better placed to explain those to me. I've only been into the prep bay probably twice this week because I've been nestling upstairs in my CAD den and doing other jobs. So I'm going to hand over to Mark and let him explain what the body prep guys have been up to this week.
All right, welcome to this week. Churchill, still 320 in it, dry. I'm almost there, ready to do a bit of sealer work, and then I will be jumping onto the wet flat. But I've been busy with other stuff this week. I've had to paint some stuff for assembly, like stuff for the Mark 1 Escort, etc. So yeah, just dry blocking. It's mainly the front what's taking the time because it's so complex. With all the curves and that, I've got to be careful not to square it off. So yeah, just today I'll just keep slowly like working it in, and hopefully I'll get it blown off, cleaned up, and then I'll get the sealer work done around the rails, doors, just the little bits where it just needs odd sealer, so when I wet flat it, the water won't seep into the seams and start rusting. And that's it. So hopefully, I think the M3 is going to be taking the booth time before this because Steve and Gaz are just soldiering away on it. Everything's all wet flatted. Yeah, I think the shell's wet flatted, bumpers are wet flatted, bonnet, doors, all the panels are ready. So I think they're just tightening some little pinholes up, what was in the carbon panels. I think they're going to get that button up. Same with like what I was going to do with the Jag. Just fill in the odd little sealer bits, go around all the little defects, etc. Clean it, mask it, and that's it. Hopefully going for its colour then. And get that out and start polishing it. And also, if you want to go to the merch store, get your sick-ass t-shirt like this, look trendy as me, the old Esprit project, and if you've got a piggy bank knocking about, crack it open, we could possibly get it built for you. So also, if you want to follow me on Instagram for a bit more behind the scenes, seeing a bit more of in the body shop, just give us a follow on my Instagram account, Retro Power Mark. Jamie will drop a link down below, hopefully. So yeah, have a little look. Might be some funny stuff.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. And we're going to move on now. And I'm going to bypass the Jaguar E-Type because I'm going to let Cal talk about that. Because the progress on that has been CAD related, and we did have a visit from Andy from Andy Hall, who's going to be spearheading the sheet metal work on that. But I'm going to let Cal elaborate on that. Second Allegro, but this is actually the first Allegro, and there's a relevant, in fact I'm going to start the Allegro discussion here and then we'll wander on. Lots of Allegro progress this week. That's probably the main focus of progress in the fabrication shop this week, really. Although quite a lot of it hasn't been fabrication, it's been carbon fibre related. I think I mentioned, or very briefly mentioned last week, that we'd had a little bit of an issue with the fit of the valance on car number 2, which is the one we're working on at the moment, versus the quarter panels. The alignment wasn't quite perfect on the area below the rear tail lights. Well, that's one of the key areas that's been progressed in the last few days. And I'm just going to point at this car. This is the car that we scanned when we did just to recap, so that viewers that aren't familiar with these cars will be on the same page as we are. To generate the carbon fibre quarter panels that you can see on the other car, being fitted on the other car at the moment. In order to generate those, George and Luke scanned the Allegro body shells, and they scanned this Allegro body shell particularly. I think a backup scan may have been done of the other one, but certainly all of the initial scan work was carried out on this car, which was an 11,000 mile, one owner, stored in a garage since 1982 car, so pretty much as clean and tidy an Allegro as you're likely to find. Zero corrosion that needed repairing. The only corrosion on this was in areas that we were removing anyway, so I don't think you'd find much of a better car, really. And that scan work was done, and then that scan work was used as the basis for all the CAD work to generate the tools to generate the book, which was then machined, which you'll have seen in previous episodes being machined, and then from that a mould was taken, and then from that mould the carbon fibre panels were made. All of that comes back to the original scan work that was done on this car. And one of our sort of terrors was that our scan work could have been out. We were trusting completely in the Peel scanner and the Peel 3D software, and we've found no significant problems there at all. No deviations. One of the issues you can get with scan data is if you're lacking in reference points with structured light scan work, you can actually get twisting in the model, in the point cloud that's generated. But we've had no problems with that. But we did have a problem with the fit in this area. And it transpired, and we did discover this a little after the CAD, but we didn't actually realise that there was as much difference as there was. This car had actually had a bump earlier on in its life, in its very short driving life. It had had a rear end bump, and this rear valance had been replaced. And what we weren't aware of is that the rear valance was actually not the correct shape on this car and doesn't match the other car where it is the correct shape. But of course, all of the scan data and CAD data was done to match this car. So what we've had to do is make some tweaks to the valance shape on that car to make it match this one, which is not, because it's not exactly the right shape. So that's where the basis of a lot of the work that's happened this week, well, not a lot, a proportion of the work that's happened this week has been, I think last week you saw that the valance was detached. Well, the valance is sat on that table there, and Bobby's reshaped that now to match the curvature of the carbon fibre, which matches car number 1, and then that valance can be refitted very soon. Will be refitted, and the reinforcing plates refitted to the back of the chassis rails here. These are the Integra chassis rails. The reinforcing plates will be added to these to spot welded to the rear panel, to the valance. So that'll all go back together very soon, and then the profile will be then correct to match the carbon fibre. And obviously when we come to car number 1, which will be the second one that we're panelling, then it'll be much easier because the parts will fit that car. It was just one of those things that happens. Just have to deal with it. It's not the end of the world. We got to the bottom of it. Bobby and Tom have got to the bottom of the issues, found the problems, dealt with them, and progress is being made, so that's fine. Tom has been working on these rear closing panels inside the boot, getting the flanges in place to hold them in place, doing the trimming back of the old rear wheel arch, inner rear wheel arch tubs. And at the moment, I believe Tom's patterning up for, I'm just looking in place, but I think Tom's patterning up for the inner arch tubs in order to make the actual rear inner arch tubs. And that's the next phase of operations there. So yeah, progress is being made on the rear end. The delicate and quite fairly convoluted and very focused operation of getting the quarter panels fixed in exactly the right places and make sure that they're secure, make sure that they can be bonded properly, make sure that they're capable of being fitted and unfitted cleanly at the point we come to bond them, because if you can't be struggling with the panel at the point you need to be bonding it in place. So there's a lot of critical work involved in making sure that these fit accurately, which has been done. We're really happy with how everything fits now. There's a couple of care points that we've got in our heads that we need to address when fitting these. There's a couple of areas where we know we've got to deflect a flange with the bonding, with the adhesive on, and then pull that flange back into place once the panels go on. But we have a plan there. We know what we're clamping with. We know how everything's going to fit. So we're really happy with that. So really, as I say, the next phase is what Tom's working on now, which is the inner arch tubs and the sill closing panel. And we'll actually have a small panel in the bottom of the inner arch here that we're going to have to bond in at the end, because we need to leave clearance for this flange to be able to bond the quarter panel on. And then we still need access down here, so we're going to make a little closing panel at the bottom of the inner arch to just finish that section off, that we can bond in after we've put everything else together. So yeah, we're quite pleased with that. I think Carl's just been sorting out some more adhesive. We're actually going to need to get some more bonding adhesive, so I think Carl's been on the phone to Wayside Adhesives this morning, just getting some further adhesive organised, because we're actually getting through it quite quickly at the moment. It's a two-component epoxy adhesive that we use, which is designed for bonding carbon fibre and fiberglass and steel and aluminium and mixtures thereof. Specifically designed for that job. It's a specifically structural, automotive and marine adhesive, and it contains glass beads that actually set the panel gap, that actually set a gap so that the adhesive film thickness is correct. And it's incredibly strong. The pull strength on it is enormous. So there's no, in terms of strength, I think I've seen a comment in the past talking about the strength of the bond, questioning about the strength of the bonding of the panels. So it's incredibly strong. An awful lot of parts of modern cars are actually glued together with high strength adhesives rather than welded. There are issues with peel and needing fixings to prevent peeling of panels in crash tests, but the actual tensile strength of the joints is really not a problem at all. So that's been going on there, and then the next stages to that are the door panel is also put on in place at the moment. I'm not going to shut that in case there's something else going on that I'm missing, but yeah, the door panel's all clamped in place. I think that was pretty much at that stage last week. Bobby's got the doors de-skinned, got the carbon fibre skins in place, all the panels line up nicely. And he's then moved on to the front end and been fitting the headlights. He's had the headlights fitted, the grille fitted, got the wings lined up, and then the final bit, which you may remember on car number 1, we also had an issue with, were these little sections here, the very top of the front valance panel, where it comes up next to the headlight and meets the inner wing. There, the bonnet has to come down and line up with that. If you look at factory Allegros, that bit never lines up very well. It's a point where, if looking at photographs of them, they're kind of all over the place. And we already had to tweak car number 1 quite heavily there, and we're tweaking this one as well. Now we've had the headlights in and the bonnet shut, it's evident that this is not really quite in line. It's close, but not quite right. So Bobby's doing a little bit of tweaking of these, split these, move them out, move these forward a little bit, and then weld that back up, just to get the alignment dead on there. That's really close now. So yeah, it's all coming together really well, and we really are on the final furlong of bodywork and engineering work on, and dry build work on these now. So really getting quite close to being into the body shop with these. We're not quite there, but we're getting pretty close. And I think, thinking of all the things I've forgotten to cover, I haven't done any questions this week. I'll try and do some questions next week. Hopefully you might have noticed I've popped onto the questions on our channel, and actually I'm going through and I'm trying to answer a few on our channel. Obviously Cal does the main admin on our channel, so when you see the Retro Power Cars responses, that'll be Cal, but I try and go on there as well and do some responses as well, just to try and keep on top of some of the questions. So you realise we do read quite a lot of them, not all of them, but we do try and read quite a lot of them. But I think on that note, I'm going to hand over to Cal and let him take you through the assembly shop and the CAD den.
Thank you very much, Nat. I'm going to start in the office because there's a couple of things on the side here of relevance. So this is the gearbox for one of the two Allegro builds. It's an Integra Type R gearbox. And this has just come back from JP Race Shop at Silverstone, who do generally our manual transmission rebuilds and our differential rebuilds, which I'll come on to in a sec. But this is the Integra box. It's basically been stripped apart completely. We've had the casing back, all the fasteners, bead blasted the casing, had all the fasteners zinc plated, given them back to JP, and then they've done the internal rebuild with new bearings, seals, etc. It's kind of just the standard process with transmissions that we do, because we're trying to end up with cars that are essentially new cars. We go through all the mechanicals in detail and try and make sure everything's as new as it can be. And the differential is for Redux number 4. So it's got a temporary diff cover on it at the minute, just for the sake of transport, but this is replaced with a billet diff cover on the final item with 2 ears on it. Same deal though, the casing in this occasion, because it's iron and not aluminium, has been blasted, zinc metal sprayed and black powder coated, and obviously all the steel parts zinc or yellow zinc passivate plated is I think the correct terminology for it. And this has a gripper diff in it, and then the crown wheel and pinions in these, I forget the exact ratio now off the top of my head, but what we did is actually snap up a whole job lot of BMW differentials, complete differential units, but different casing, but they use the same internals as donors for brand new BMW crown wheel and pinions. So these are literally a complete new build, because the crown wheel and pinion are brand new BMW parts, not available, but we managed to get them in new old stock complete diff units, and then gripper diffs in those. If you follow me, we shall see what else has been going on. So last week we got a huge batch of machined parts back from anodising. I don't know if I actually touched on this last week, but we'd boxed up quite a few Redux parts and quite a few Escort parts to go off for anodising. I think there was 103 parts in total. We actually split the batch into 2, because half of it was going to be vapor blasted before anodising and half of it wasn't. Reason for that is sometimes it's nice to have a sort of visible machined finish on parts, but then on other parts where it's not possible to get a perfect machined finish for whatever reason, sometimes it might be tab machined, you've got tabs you've got to file off, etc. You can get an even finish by vapor blasting them first, but it gives it a slightly duller matte finish. So it's a 50-50 mix, and I was so nervous about bits getting mixed up and not getting the same process. We sent one batch first and then followed with the other batch. Amongst the Escort bits were the parts for these mirrors, actually, which I'm literally just in the process of assembling now. So these are the mirrors. Mark painted these this week. I think you probably got some footage of that earlier. And then the separate parts here were black anodised. And then actually I'm just putting these little water jet cut plates in at the minute, which will be the mounts for the pivot unit for the actual mirror itself. So they're looking good. And then another biggie that's been occupying my week so far has been the carbon parts for the Escort. So very end of last week we got the boot and bonnet for this car, but in 2 parts. So a bonnet inner and outer, boot inner and outer. And we've been going through the perilous task of bonding those in situ on the car. Now normally it would be nice to have all the panels at the point you do the paintwork on the car, and you can perfectly match everything in terms of the shape. Now, we didn't really have the luxury of that, because by the time we'd got the cars prepped to a state we were happy to shape the bonnet and boot lid in terms of the patterns for them, the lead time we then had with the carbon stuff meant that we didn't want to hold up the process on the car by waiting until we had those before finishing the paint. So we wanted to just crack on and get the paintwork done, which meant we've got the slightly high jeopardy job of getting the carbon parts on afterwards, making sure they're exactly the right shape, and then painting them afterwards, which is one of the driving factors as to why we got the inners and outers separate and then bonded them here ourselves together, because I wanted the opportunity to get everything aligned perfectly on the car and then bond them. So the boot, it was basically a case of preparing the inner with the latch and the threaded inserts for the hinges, getting the inner on there and trimmed and aligned until the point we were happy with that. Putting some sections of boot seal in there, but not all of them, and the reason for that is that I didn't want to distort the shape of the inner when it's not got the strength of having the outer on it as well. It'll bend much more easily than when it has got that strength on it. So we put sections of seal to hold it at the right position, and then trimmed and aligned the outer, put alignment marks on it. Then we made some clamps. They're actually the clamps that Bobby was using on the Allegro, little folded steel clamps with a bolt on them that we could actually get into the shut so they can be put in situ with the panel on and closed. And then we made some aluminium bars just to spread the load a bit so they didn't dimple down where each of those clamps was. A strip all the way along the back there, and then yeah, bit the bullet, epoxy bonding material all around the edge, which it sets really hard so you can sand it nicely and you don't get any flexing or cracking on the visible edge where the paint goes. And then just a bead of a more flexible polyurethane, single part polyurethane, where the reinforcer section is on the underside of here, so you don't get any sort of visible marks. It's always a problem with these sort of flexible panels, even when they're steel actually, is where the reinforcer sits. If it's a very flexible panel, when you're block sanding it, the support of the reinforcement underneath actually tends to mean that you end up with a low spot where the reinforcement is, as it's more rigid as you sand over it. So that's why we do the more flexible material in the central sections. But that's looking extremely good. Bonded it yesterday, took all the clamps off this morning. Happy with how that is. Opens and closes perfectly. I've got the full seal on the way now, which I'm just going to put in and get that set up and sand the edges to get the gaps perfect, and then that will be ready for paint. Similar process on the bonnet. I probably mentioned this before, but the bonnet was a combination of two methods in making that. So the outer was literally a mould pulled from the original bonnet, which we'd prepped and painted and shaped to match the shell perfectly before they painted this shell. The inner, we used a 3D scan of that bonnet and then designed the inner because we wanted the reinforcement to look pretty, basically, the underside of the bonnet to look pretty and not just kind of a mould taken from that original pressed metal cross that's under there. So that was actually designed in CAD, a tool machine for that from a solid polyurethane block, and then the inners were laid up in that tool. So they were basically straight from CAD to reality, and it was a similar process on the front. Get the inner on, latched, aligned, get the outer over it, get everything perfectly aligned, and then bite the bullet and bond it in place, and that's looking good as well. So these are going to be a visible carbon weave finish on the underside on both, but a painted finish on the outside, although actually I do quite like the sort of spoon look with the black panels on the coloured car. Gibbo's been busy on some interior details, so he was just doing the fitment of the sill finishing trims that just clamp the carpet down the sill. We're basically gathering another anodising batch together, which I think will be the last one for this car. That's one of the items which needs to go, so he was trial fitting those, making sure they sit well. Just trim the fronts, I think, where they meet up with the kick panel so they butt up perfectly. But they can go, and then we've got to do, there's a 90-degree sort of edging strip that runs across the low bulkhead behind the seats, which I think is going to be one of his next jobs, because that's got to go away with the anodising as well. And there were a couple of bits, I think, relating to parts I've been on with. I'm just trying to think what they were now. The strut tops. We're just having those machined at the minute. Basically a caster angled strut top to go in the front, because we decided to get the caster we wanted. The front wheels looked visually a bit too far forward in the arch, which is a fairly standard Escort thing. When you push the lower arms forward to get a lot of caster on there, they do look quite far forward in the arch. So we've actually pulled the top back, but we didn't want to have an adjustable mount in there, so we've adjusted it until we got the angle we wanted, and then made a new top mount with that adjustment already built into it, but fixed. So they'll be on the way, and I think that's pretty much the last mechanical part. Then going back to the interior, Dean has been here doing a very nice job of the cage upholstery. So all the straight sections are now upholstered, leathered, hand stitched on there, and then the corner finishes we've now printed, so they're going to go away to Dean to leather those, and they'll be the finishing touch on the cage. I mentioned those in previous episodes. It's the way we've come up with of upholstering the cage without getting wrinkling on the corners. The back shelf's now all in place for the final time. The vent panel around that sort of lets the cabin air out is now in and looking pretty smart. Mark painted that water jet cut metal piece, which is the final finisher on that this week, and we fitted that. Quite obviously also the glass is now in, so the cage upholstery was the last thing, the last piece of the puzzle before that glass could go in. It's just a massive domino effect now, because all of that rear end stuff can go in now. The mirrors that I'm just assembling can now go on the doors, and then, well, as soon as they're on, the door cards can go in. As soon as those sill trims are back from anodising, all the carpets can go in for the final time. So we're sort of, it feels like a snowball gaining momentum at the very last stage now. So it's all sort of coming together. So I think that's pretty much a good summary of where we're at with that. And what else have we got going on? I think actually the other main area to dwell on is probably CAD related. So Luke's been on with a couple of things. He's just in the latter stages of the egg crate book design for the E-Type. So we had Andy Hall over, I think yesterday or the day before, Vintage Machines. He's going to be doing the metalwork for the rear end of the Geneva E-Type. So Luke's just in the latter stage of designing that egg crate book. That's then going to be handed over to Jim to do the routering of all the segments for that. And then the other thing Luke's been on with is a visualization rendering set for the interior of the Interceptor, with a view to starting to make the centre console. So the dash layout is more or less standard Interceptor, but the console will be completely custom. So it was worth us doing all that in CAD, so we can visualise it, make sure the customer's happy, but then the actual components of the centre console will all be machined from that CAD as well. So loving the layout of that. It's very, very much Series 3 Interceptor based, but with a different layout of switches. Obviously we've got that BMW shifter in there, Alpine 9-inch screen on the angled section. We'll probably also do our own instruments on it. So that's coming together nicely. And then George has been in the depths of Scimitar design. And he's making really good progress on that now. It's amazing on that Scimitar. We've both commented on the fact that subtle changes make all the difference, and you can spend quite a lot of time nearly where you want it to be and thinking, it's not quite right, it doesn't sort of jump out at me. And then you make a series of very small, like sub 10mm changes on things, and it completely transforms it. So we've been playing a lot with the back window shape this week, because we think it introduces a bit more balance to the look of the inflated rear arch to have a larger sort of C-pillar shape in there. So we've kind of flipped the rear end of the window angle from being back at the bottom to being back at the top. And initially wasn't sure about that, and we played around with plate shapes quite a lot, pulling the top angle down a little bit more, subtly changing the radiuses in the corners, subtly changing the height of it. And it's transformed it. And then, like the last time I had a look at it, I was, I'm in no doubt. There was a series I went through where I was in doubt whether the change actually helped at all, and now I'm in no doubt that it completely transforms the look of it. And we've dropped the roof very slightly at the back, got rid of the little flick up at the back, and shortened the rear window a fair amount, which is kind of helping give it a much sleeker appearance at the back. There's still probably the main area to resolve still is where the body style line, which I think last week we were juggling where to position that on the body completely. We're now happy completely with how that runs from the door handle over the arch. The front arch shape's almost completely there now. It's just trying to decide how that style line integrates into the shapes of the front of the car, and whether we just feather it out or whether it carries on one of the shapes from the front. But I think we're pretty close to getting the basics of the overall style of the car down, and then it's going to be starting to refine that a little bit, and then the mammoth task of actually then transforming it into literally the components that will go together to make the body shell. So quite a challenge ahead of us there. But yeah, I'm excited. We did some renderings of literally the original scanned car versus the redesign, and now I'm in no doubt now that it's where we want it to go. So that's really exciting. I've got this sort of overall feeling that I've missed something massive. I'm hoping Jamie might be able to point me in the right direction. No, I'm not sure. We did a couple more things on Kaiser this week, actually. I noticed whilst I was inspecting it underneath that one of the rear silencers sounded a little bit rattly when you knocked it. And I thought it might be the perforated tube in the silencer had come adrift, and that was actually the case. So we took that back box off, chopped the tailpipe off, reattached that perf tube in there and reattached the tailpipe, re-welded it, put it back on. And I think there was something else on that as well. No, I'd covered it already. It was the subwoofer. The subwoofer was rattling slightly in the boot. I'm just trying to identify a couple of little rattles I noticed whilst I was on test drive. And I think it was basically the subwoofer rattling on the trim panel in the boot and one of the exhaust perfs rattling in the silencer. Oh, and I noticed also one of the fuel tank straps underneath was just slapping slightly on the fuel tank, so we've just padded that as well, although I don't think that would have been very noticeable in the car. But that's basically now awaiting another test drive just for me to verify that those changes have made a difference, and I think we'll be getting that back to its owner. And I think at the moment that probably covers everything in here, although as I said I still have an overriding feeling I've missed something major, but we'll assume not and see you next week.